Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to the Bulwark Live on Sunday. I'm very pleased to be joined today by old friend and colleague Tom Joscelyn. We worked together over the years at the Weekly Standard, and Tom has since written for the Bulwark. Trained originally as an economist and worked as an economist and knows a lot about why these tariffs are crazy. But we're not going to focus on that exactly today, because after that, Tom worked on the Middle East, on counterterrorism, and then on the Trump phenomenon here at home. Was the top writer, key staff member on the January 6th committee report, January 6th committee, key writer of that report. So Tom, and now senior fellow at Just Security, very fine outfit connected to NYU, which you should all look at the website and see a lot of good legal analysis, as well as Tom's not entirely less legal than more. I don't know, what should we call it? Your
legal adjacent, I guess.
Legal adjacent analysis. Anyway, Tom, thanks for joining me today.
No, thanks for having me, Bill.
And we're going to talk about something Tom and I were talking about just on the phone this week. I thought this is really worth half an hour of our discussion with all of you, which is people being surprised at how extreme Trump is being in his second term and what's going on. These people are kind of crazy, and the conspiracism. And Tom said this is always what was going to happen. The MAGA loons are in charge. And so, Tom, explain.
Yeah, I mean, you saw what, our conversation came out of the fact that Laura Loomer, this far right conspiracist and extremist, was at the White House and having a meeting with Trump. And after her meeting, 3 NSC staffers are fired, and the director of the NSA and the top deputy are fired. And there's some reporting now, a lot of reporting that these people were on basically her list of people who should have been fired by Trump, and that Trump essentially took her recommendations and followed through on it. And the question, there's a lot of people who are watching this and thinking, my God, how can Laura Loomer have so much influence over?
Say a word about just who Laura Loomer is, because it's worth.
Really. She's a right wing nutter. She's known for 9/11 conspiracy theories. Last year, Bill, she was traveling with Trump around the 9/11 anniversary, and it caused a big stir. And the campaign was like, okay, we have to back away from this and kind of distance ourselves a little bit, because she's so known for being so extreme. She's somebody who a couple years ago, she jumped a fence at Nancy Pelosi's home in California to stage a protest. She's posted all sorts of crazy stuff online, 9/11 conspiracy theories, extremist stuff, anti-immigrant, xenophobic hate stuff. I mean, all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories and nonsense. She's well known. And, the interesting thing about Laura Loomer, though, that kind of came out in this New York Times reporting about her influence with Trump over these firings, is that she described herself as describes her mentor as Roger Stone. And that's a key fact here, because Roger Stone, I think, is a seminal character in the evolution of how MAGA and right-wing conspiracism evolved into a dominant force now in our politics. He's the longest-serving political advisor to Donald Trump. He's somebody who brokered the relationship between Donald Trump and Alex Jones back in 2015 when Trump goes on his show and endorses him. He's somebody who's been on Jones' show many, many times as a guest host on InfoWars. And Stone is one of the premier conspiracy theorists of our time, and he's been injecting this into our politics for a long time. And so for Loomer to be, say that this is the guy who was her mentor makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is how she probably helped get connected in the Trump world. Last year too, there's another fact for you. She floated this idea that Ron DeSantis' wife was faking breast cancer last year, or faking cancer last year, as part of this, gambit against DeSantis when he was challenging Trump in the primary. So this is somebody who. What I would say about Laura Loomer is she's crazy. She traffics in crazy stuff, but it shows how this crazy conspiracy theories have been weaponized as a political weapon by Trump and by the people around Trump to push their agenda forward. And this is really what's driving MAGA and driving Trumpism and his policies. The MAGA loons, they really are in charge. This shouldn't surprise anybody. This is a really key pillar of Trump's base, of Trump's political support, and it animates a lot of what drives him in his agenda.
I think you said somewhere that the conspiracism isn't just a sidebar or a footnote to Trumpism and to their ascent to power. It's really at the heart of it. So explain.
Yeah, conspiracism, I mean, it's always been with us, right? I mean, the paranoid style has always been in American politics. We've always had conspiracy theories, well on the John Birch Society, and the Birchers and that whole phenomenon, which was tapped down so many decades ago. So this is something that pops up routinely on both the right and the left. But what I would say is what's very different about the moment we live in and really over the last decade is that I think Donald Trump's key insight was that this online community of conspiracists who are really extreme in their views is much larger than a lot of people realize. So, for example, I saw this documentary on Alex Jones. And I can't remember if it was the NBC one or the HBO one. There was this documentary on him. And one of his producers was saying, I think correctly, that Jones's audience for any one of his productions could be as large as like the NBC Nightly News. That's how many
Jones,
millions.
just to be clear, he's the InfoWars guy who spread the theory that the kids killed at Sandy Hook were.
Yeah, sorry. I'm assuming everybody knows Alex Jones is because he's so toxic. I mean, he's the one who spread the Sandy Hook conspiracy theory that this was a government operation to kill kids, to pretend to kill kids were killed in order to take people's guns away, right? So he's an anti-government extremist and conspiracy theorist who's well known for trafficking 9/11 conspiracy theories, trafficking in these kind of gun conspiracies and other things. And he's somebody who's deeply unpopular amongst the mainstream, but has been very much embraced by MAGA, by Donald Trump, by J.D. Vance, by Elon Musk, Roger Stone. A lot of these people at the, sort of core players in MAGA are Alex Jones guys. They're InfoWars guys. And should be troubling to us, right? Like you have the InfoWars mindset is basically running the government right now, which should be a real wake-up call for anybody who thinks that there's some sort of sanity at the end of this MAGA rainbow, The
Laura Loomer thing is incredible because she was tweeting against Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, and claiming that maybe the signal gate text thing was a setup or whatever, or that anyway she wants Waltz fired because he's also a neocon. People like he was friendly to people like me and you 10 or 11 years ago.
Time, yeah.
quite a while ago. Yeah. And I remember joking to someone, like this is midweek, I suppose. I mean, this is just Loomer tweeting, but of course Trump is seeing or being shown these tweets, and next thing we know, they'll be on the phone together. And, Trump will be acting on some of it. And then the other person just laughed. And I even was kind of half joking. And the next thing, literally, she's in the White House. She's on the phone with Trump. And I think at least three, but maybe more national security senior staffers of Waltz were fired. For now, Waltz is there. For now, his deputy, Alex Wong, is there. But she's gone after him with the most vitriolic, just kind of racist.
Racist, yeah. I mean, it's racist,
Chinese American, I guess. And for now, they're still there. And then the director of the National Security Agency is a 4-star general, very well respected, I gather, and very not political. I don't know if you've ever dealt with him. I haven't, but I was struck that Republican members of Congress respected him, Democratic members and stuff. He's fired because Laura Loomer thinks he's bad because he was, I guess,
some connection to General Milley was the premise of it.
Yeah, he was put there in the Biden administration, and Milley was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I mean, what kind of level of? I mean, that should really. I mean, it's more alarming that their doctrines are a little crazy, or they're not personally the most admirable people in the world, or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point, though, right? Like, why is the president of the United States taking time out of his schedule to meet with Laura Loomer? Right. And the thing that's difficult for people like us, I think, to accept is that this online community of conspiracists and extremists has a lot more political sway and power now than people want to accept, right? This lunacy really does drive Trump's agenda and drives Trump's politics. It's a key component of his whole political coalition. When he goes on the Alex Jones show, InfoWars, in December 2015, and praises Jones and his audience, and he brings them into his political coalition explicitly. He does that. There's a direct line from that moment to a lot of the crazy we're seeing now. There's a direct line between that moment and January 6th. There's a direct line to the crazy stuff we're seeing now and the way policy is being implemented. And this is a phenomenon. I pulled this, as we were preparing for the show today, I pulled this quote from, I was thinking about how to best illustrate this to people, right? And I went back to Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance used to be a somewhat normal Republican, or seemingly normal, right? Somebody who certainly didn't entertain conspiracy theories as part of his political platform. And in fact, in Hillbilly Elegy, which he gained a lot of fame for, he warns about this on the right. And he writes, and if you just forgive me for a second to read a couple passages, which I think are very illustrative. He writes, many try to blame the anger and cynicism of working class whites on misinformation. Admittedly, there is an industry of conspiracy mongers and fringe lunatics writing about all manner of idiocy, from Obama's alleged religious leanings to his ancestry. And he says, but every major news organization, even the oft-maligned Fox News, have always told the truth about Obama's citizenship status and his religious views. In other words, he was saying that even right-wing media at that time was basically had a dam against this conspiracy theories for the most part. They were keeping that bay, But he went on to say many in the white working class believe the absolute worst about their society. And he includes a sample of stuff, examples that he personally had witnessed, right? His friends and family members were emailing him things or texting him things. And one of them was that Alex Jones had this 10-year anniversary of 9/11. He had this documentary suggesting the U.S. government was, at fault for it. That was one of the things that his friends and family members had texted or emailed J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance say, this is crazy, right? Like, this is obviously not true. And he had other things about how the Newtown gun massacre was engineered by the federal government. That's a key Alex Jones conspiracy theory, the government, this deep state operation to pretend that these kids were killed, which is absolutely disgusting, obviously. And he had a couple of other examples, and he says the list goes on. But here's the key point from Hillbillyology, and I'm going to connect this to where J.D. Vance is today, okay? He writes, it's impossible to know how many people believe one or many of these stories. But if a third of our community questions the president's origin, meaning whether or not Obama really was an American, despite all evidence to the contrary, it's a good bet that the other conspiracies have broader currency than we'd like. This isn't some libertarian mistrust of government policy, which is healthy in any democracy. This is deep skepticism of the very institutions of our society, and it's becoming more and more mainstream. So J.D. Vance writes this, I don't know, Hillbillyology is what, 2015,
I think, 16.
15, 16, somewhere in there, right? He's warning about this phenomenon. J.D. Vance is experiencing in his own communities. He's seeing in his own phenomenon. He's warning about the influence of people like Alex Jones and these conspiracy theories from the far right, like Laura Loomer and others, right? Flash forward to J.D. Vance of today. So in 2021, J.D. Vance gave a speech, and ProPublica did a transcript of his speech in which he defended Alex Jones. And he said, he traffics in what people call some crazy things, but everybody believes crazy things. And there was a lot more truth in what Alex Jones had to say than like Rachel Maddow or somebody like that on MSNBC. You talk about the J.D. Vance of today. This is somebody who, he recently was, of course, during the campaign, you'll remember he was the origin of the idea these immigrants were eating cats and dogs in Ohio. He was the guy who was pushing that conspiracy theory. Some of his rhetoric, has echoed the great replacement theory, which is this white supremacist theory about what's going on with immigration. And from some subject that's near and dear to my heart because of something I've spent so much time studying when it comes to January 6th, he took this, he's claimed that the conspiracy theory of the FBI planned January 6th or instigated January 6th to entrap Trump's followers was somehow vindicated by the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General, which released a report on this, a couple months ago. Of course, the report does exactly the opposite. It says that that's a conspiracy theory that's not based in fact at all. So here's what I'm trying to say here with all this examples, right? Here's a guy who was a somewhat normal Republican or somewhat normal political figure on the rise, who was warning about the influence of far-right conspiracists like Alex Jones, like Laura Loomer and their types, right? And he's saying this is a big problem, right? But he was warning it was becoming more mainstream. After January 6th, after Trump's failures during his first term, he embraces this stuff or as a basis for his own political power. He welcomes this stuff into his own political agenda in order for him to move forward in Trump world, in MAGA world. Doesn't that tell you a lot about the moment we're at, Yeah,
and it strikes me also that these things are not static. That is to say, you think, okay, there's a bunch of conspiracists out here. Then there's, mainstream, if you want, Trumpism, I guess, here. And there's just sort of a balance between them. But it does seem like once you don't have a dam, as you said, a barrier, a wall against the conspiracists, they drive the agenda and everyone else ends up rationalizing what they're doing. I mean, January 6th is a great example of that, right?
Exactly.
I mean, this was something that beforehand was inconceivable to 90%, 80% of Republicans, even 70% probably of Trump supporters. And afterwards, gradually, and pretty quickly, though, actually, it all got kind of normalized or rationalized.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what they did. It was one of the main things I was worried about why I quit my job and went to work for the January 6th committee, because I was very worried about, this January 6th should have been a moment to put this conspiracy monster back in its box, right? And say, this is obviously leading to real world madness now in a way that is really detrimental for our democracy and threatens the very order of things and how our government functions. But instead, what the right did and what MAGA did, and certainly Trump and all the people around him did, is they doubled and tripled down on conspiracy theories, trying to deflect blame for January 6th, trying to deflect blame for the assault on the Capitol. And so you have today, I wrote a few pieces for the Bulwark on this. The director of the FBI, Kash Patel, is a guy who spent 4 years insinuating or suggesting that the FBI itself planned January 6th. He actually said during one of his podcasts, what was the FBI doing planning January 6th for a year, and he did he trafficked in all sorts of conspiracy theories on QAnon podcasts and other things. That's what he was doing for 4 years between, the end of the first Trump administration and becoming the FBI director, and his deputy director, Dan Bongino, same kind of deal, right? I mean, it's the guy who was saying that the January 6th pipe bomb, there were pipe bombs, outside the DNC headquarters and another one outside the RNC or on Capitol Hill. And he insinuated that the DNC one was a setup, was a deep state fake. The FBI had knowledge of that it wasn't letting out, and Patel did the same thing. So what should tell you is, right, the thing, Bill, people ask me when I talk about this is, well, these people can't really believe this stuff, right? Well, a couple things on that. We don't really know. I mean, right? Because you don't really know what's in somebody's mind. I mean, maybe these people do get indoctrinated in this crazy stuff, excuse me, and they start to believe it. But here's the point. Even if they don't believe it, this stuff is so politically powerful that they have to cater to it, or think they have to cater to it, for their political power within MAGA and within the right wing now, right? That is what should tell you that's the warning sign, right? Is that this stuff is not disqualifying any longer. Instead, it's a source of power, a source of political power on the right, to do these types of things. And we can go through. I have a whole list I prepared for here. We can talk more as we go on. But there are all sorts of examples throughout the administration of this phenomenon. This is what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think one good one is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who 50 out of 53 Republican senators voted to confirm. I actually, that one surprised me a little more than some of the others. I hoped you could defeat one or two of these nominees could be defeated. It was so obviously unqualified in so many ways. But, there was some loyalty to Hegseth from being on Fox and Patel from having been or worked on the Hill and been sort of, on their side, so to speak. Kennedy hadn't been. Kennedy had been, insofar as he had a real political affiliation, was on the left and with the environmentalists, a little kooky anti-science types, but they were mostly lefty kind of kooks, And the idea that they felt obligated to him, that was because Trump picked him, but the idea that Trump was comfortable with him, and the idea that he is actually the Secretary of HHS in some ways is even as crazy as Patel being at the FBI or, Hegseth.
Or even more so even.
Yeah, don't you think? I mean, we have this massive medical and biomedical and establishment and physicians and hospitals, and it's whatever its problems, it's bureaucratic, it's this, it's that. It's pretty impressive. Done a lot of good for the United States of America and done a lot of good for the world. And this guy, an anti-vaxxer and a real kook, I mean, is in charge of the government's part of it and having, and incidentally has not, and then he reassured the senators on the Hill, well, of course, we didn't really assure them, but they wanted to hear that he would be more reasonable in office. So that was their justification for voting for him. And of course, now it's going right ahead. So talk a little about that. I was just really astonished by the Kennedy thing.
Well, the Kennedy thing, no, this speaks to the point I was talking about, how powerful this is now as a political constituency, these conspiracists, right? Because remember, the reason RFK Jr. Gets to become Secretary of Health and Human Services is that he cuts a quid pro quo with Trump during the campaign. That there was a worry both on the Trump side and on the left that RFK Jr. would split the vote and would cause in the swing states, basically either Trump to lose or to win, depending on who you're talking to, right? But Trump was sufficiently worried about this that he cuts a deal with RFK Jr. where RFK Jr. says, all right, I'll endorse you, Trump, as long as you make me, a secretary in your cabinet and you give me HHS, right? And Trump followed through on the quid pro quo. This shows you how powerful Trump thinks conspiracism is for his political conspiracy. And in fact, I think it probably is how powerful it is. And let's talk about, we just talked a moment ago about whether or not these people really believe this stuff or not. Well, RFK Jr. is a guy who I think certainly, since he predates a lot of MAGA and his views predate a lot of what we're talking about, he almost certainly believes this stuff. I mean, he's the guy who said that Wi-Fi causes cancer and quote unquote leaky brain. This is something he told, Joe Rogan. He's claimed the chemicals in the water supply turn children transgender, right? He's claimed that antidepressants are the real cause for school shootings, not guns, of course, or mental health issues or anything else, but, drugs. He said, he's just a couple times or many times that AIDS may not even be caused by HIV. I mean, this is the guy who's leading the HHS, and he doesn't accept the subtle science on this. This is in addition to stuff like his vaccine conspiracies, right? Excuse me. Claiming, for example, that vaccines cause autism, which has been roundly debunked. So this is a guy who he rides. I know some of Renee DiResto. I think you've done one of these conversations with, right? She writes in her book about all this. She's somebody who studied online misinformation, disinformation, how these communities formed, and she has a really good summary in the beginning of her book, which I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but I've got it here in my library. That from 2014 onward, these communities of these vaccine skeptics really formed online and became very vocal and very influential and very powerful, and were able to project themselves into local politics. RFK Jr. is the guy who was the leading advocate for that. He was the guy who helped create that wave and then rode that wave to political power. So much so that 10 years later in 2024, he's getting a quid pro quo from Donald Trump to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services as long as he endorsed him. That's a dire circumstance, right? This is a 5-alarm warning that reality has broken here, and that the people in charge are the MAGA loons, and they believe stuff that's just completely outside the bounds of reason.
I mean, one point Renee makes, and I did a conversation with her on Conversations with Bill Kristol, which people can look at, but they should look at her book and subsequent articles. Renee DiResto, she's Googleable, bitterly attacked and slandered by the MAGA people who tried to put her out of business by threatening to Stanford University, where she was. And unfortunately, Stanford didn't really, I've got to say, stand up to the threats, and she's now here in DC. But anyway, one point she makes in the conversation with me, and I think in the book, is a lot of research shows that people who believe in one set of conspiracy theories in one area are much more susceptible to believe a set of conspiracy theories in another area. Yeah. So it's not stupid for the QAnon people to go after. I mean, there's nothing inherently connected about anti-vax and Sandy Hook and 9/11. I mean, these are different things, right? Theory. But it turns out that and the algorithms, of course, see this online and start to feed. And they did studies that really showed this, that if were an anti-vax conspiracy theorist, you got fed 9/11 or immigration conspiracy theories. And then it turns out this network of conspiracists is bigger than one would have hoped, right?
That's basically what we're talking about here. I mean, this is a huge audience online. This is the gatekeepers of traditional media are no longer the gatekeepers. For all the time that the far right and MAGA world complains about the media, right? The media has no influence over a large section of the population now. I mean, that's one of the things that JD Vance even talks about. So the audience is huge for it. And you just mentioned, immigration conspiracy theories.
But just on that, just the point. Sure. The point Renee makes is that, I mean, pre-online, the anti-vaxxers, and this is how she got involved in this, incidentally, is I think a young mom in California whose kid was getting vaccinated, at age whatever, 6 months or 18 months, and then a lot of others weren't, or some others weren't, and she got alarmed about this and looked into it. But the anti-vaxxers wouldn't have hooked up with the 9/11 people, right? I mean, there was sort of no natural way for that to happen. In a sense, you would have your anti-vax newsletters, I guess, and your anti-vax discussion groups in the old days or something, and then you'd have conventions maybe, and you'd have the same with other areas. And I think this is where the internet, I think, has really made a difference, a very bad difference, right?
I mean, this is the premise a lot. I mean, it's not the premise. It's the finding of all my research on January 6th and jihadism and ISIS and all these different forms of extremism, both violent extremism and nonviolent extremism, is that the internet and social media in particular, I think, have broken human civilization. I think they really have. What they've done is, for all the good they do in connecting people who are sane and reasonable, is that they've basically allowed a lot of less stable people to connect and to herd and create these online herds that then manifest themselves in the real world. So the phenomenon you're talking about there, where there's these crossover herds from anti-vax people to 9/11 truthers to great white replacement theorists to white nationalists. I mean, you can just see how this all starts sort of stewing together. And by the way, leads to widespread skepticism of the 2020 election and the fact that Joe Biden won. And that's what gives you January 6th, right? I mean, a lot of the planning for January 6th takes place on social media when people start reacting to Trump's lies about the election and start pre-planning for violence. And the response from MAGA is to deflect responsibility from its own side and from its own conspiracism onto the FBI, onto the so-called deep state. So in other words, the conspiracy becomes it's a full circle, right? They basically the conspiracy theorists and the conspiracism causes the event January 6th, and then as part of the whole conspiracy worldview, they then blame the very actors that they were conspiring against. It's a very strange phenomenon, but that's where we're at, and I think it's a very dire spot. I mean, just to give you one more example, because you mentioned anti-immigration conspiracy theories, right? Tom Homan, I looked this up. I didn't see a lot of reporting on this. He was at this gun
He's
festival.
The Trump White House immigration
border
czar.
czar. He's the guy who's out there talking about rounding up the biggest mass deportations in history, and he's sort of the zealot who's leading the charge for Trump and all that stuff. He attended this gun rally last year. Basically, the people there, I think, essentially worship guns or AR-15s. It's crazy stuff. And he was speaking in front of a podium where they had this crest with a cross on it and guns behind it. I mean, just really spooky imagery. But during that, he floats the great white replacement theory, which is this white nationalist theory that the Democrats and the elites are replacing white people with immigrants in order to get more voters, And he doesn't distance himself from it during this talk. He says, call it the great white replacement theory or whatever you want to call it. I don't care. I mean, this type of thing, right, would have been disqualifying for these people not too long ago, right? Now it's baked in to their politics. It's baked in. It's actually a source of power for them. And that's the transformation here that's occurred,
No, that's interesting, if depressing. I'm curious, what do you think about, Trump, I'll just introduce it this way. In 2011, Trump started toying with and publicizing the birther, Obama birther conspiracy. I remember thinking at the time, I didn't like Trump. I knew him very, very slightly and met him once or two or three times probably. But of course, knew of him and his career as a con man and fraudulent type business person and all this in New York. And a demagogue, hopeful demagogue. He wanted to run in 99, 2000. Anyway. I remember being surprised in a way that he was going to the birther thing, because whatever one can say about Trump as a con man and a demagogue and a rabble rouser, it didn't seem like he was actually a conspiracist. I don't remember that in the earlier Trump. He was, just kind of your typical, but a certain type of, as I say, unpleasant demagogue. And maybe he always had done a little more of the conspiracy theories, but I don't really recall him being part of that world. And I wonder if he sensed that was a big, and I thought at the time, I thought it was a mistake. I mean, it went nowhere. The Obama birther stuff was discredited. People like me and everyone on Fox, almost everyone on Fox was like, well, this is beyond the pale and this is embarrassing. And I remember when Romney accepted Trump's endorsement, I said, I wish he hadn't even given him the dignity of being on the stage with him for 15 minutes. Romney did it very fast. He was embarrassed by it, as you may recall. And I remember, I don't know if it was Grit Humor, someone said, yeah, it's too bad, but whatever, it's politics. And we were all kind of, I wonder if Trump saw a little earlier than most of us how powerful that conspiracy stuff was. He didn't have to get involved in the birther stuff. That wasn't, but he chose to, right? And I think it probably was more important than people like me realized in 2015. It gave him a certain base to start with. Do you think that's right? Or
I think you just hit I wish I had said it myself, because you just summarized the central insight here about what Trump saw that we didn't see. And one of the quotes too from that period is, you remember, he said something to Mitt Romney like, throw out the birther stuff because the crazies love it. That's one of the things he said.
Interesting.
That was what, he understood. He saw at the time that there was this huge online community that believed this crap, and that it could be a source of political power, and that you could get people riled up for you, and they'd also be very loyal to you. That's this essential insight that at the beginning of his campaign in 2015, when he goes on Alex Jones InfoWars in December 2015, that's the deal that Roger Stone has brokered for him, right? Roger Stone, who's this longtime political, political cockroach who survives every political nuclear war, apparently, he sees that this online community is vast, it's large, and could be a key constituency for Trump and his political base. And Trump brokers that deal and goes on Alex Jones and endorses Alex Jones. Alex Jones endorses him. When Trump wins in November of 2016, Alex Jones, this incredibly prolific extremist and conspiracy theorist, he gets up from the set of InfoWars and he says, that's it, folks. I won. I conquered the establishment. I won. Right? Because of Trump's victory, because Trump was for him everything he wanted to be. And I think everything he wanted in the Oval Office. I think that's the point. What you just said, I think sums it up. What Trump saw here that none of us saw is that this crazy stuff could be, instead of a detriment or something that would be disqualifying, would be a source of political power. And that's the phenomenon. JD Vance is warning about it at a time when Trump is embracing it. That's the key dynamic here, that, JD Vance is saying, boy, this stuff is crazy. I'm not endorsing it. And then Trump's out there full bore, going on Alex Jones and endorsing it. So,
and in the first term, whatever Trump thought of its political power, he certainly toyed with it. He also had Madison, Kelly, and Gary Cohn and all these people there. So it was sort of, he didn't quite get reflected in too many policies, or it was reflected temporarily, or not temporary, for a while, and then sort of constrained, I guess.
Yeah.
And now we have all the people who rode the conspiracy wave to power in positions of power.
That's it.
That's it. So
look at Elon Musk. Look at Elon Musk. Is outside of Donald Trump, who's the most powerful person across the U.S. government right now? It's Elon Musk. Elon Musk, has totally embraced conspiracy theories. So much so, I did the thread on this on Blue Sky, that Grok, and a number of other people have noticed this too. Grok, which is this AI bot on X, on what was formerly known as Twitter, which is there for fact checking and for other things, not really fact checking, but commenting on threads, and you can ask it questions. People ask it, about Musk and spreading misinformation, and Grok over and over again says that Elon Musk is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, spreaders of misinformation on X because of his conspiracy theories about COVID and elections and the like. And Grok says this over and over again. In fact, somebody asked him, well, aren't you just a leftist then for saying that, Grok? Right? And he's like, no, this is an AI bot saying, I'm not a leftist. I'm just reflecting the facts and the evidence.
I'm surprised Musk hasn't shut down Grok.
Yeah, well, actually, they asked
the algorithm.
They asked Grok that too, and Grok says if he did that, it would cause controversy. So that's probably why they're not doing it. So it's a very interesting thing, right? I mean, but Musk, again, he's another guy. I keep coming back to him, but Musk is a guy who's embraced Alex Jones. Just in the last week, he was seemingly endorsing an Alex Jones conspiracy theory with Roger Stone on their show, talking about the Wisconsin election, where Roger Stone was saying the Wisconsin election has strong evidence it was stolen for this Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. And, Musk responded like, or something like that on the bottom. And of course, Musk tried to buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat and failed. But the point is, again, this is the world's wealthiest man, richest man. Guy has immense power in the U.S. government. Why does he have time for Alex Jones? And why is he embracing Alex Jones and that type of conspiracism? Why is Donald Trump? Why is now JD Vance? You can go right down the list of all these people. The MAGA loons are in charge. That's what we're living through,
Yikes. This has not been an entirely cheerful conversation, though. I very much appreciate your take. No, it's very important, though, as you say, and not fully grasped even by me in our world, I think, in terms of, how dangerous this is and what this means for the next 3 3/4 years. I mean, with these guys in power, maybe they'll, be bugged by reality and wake up. But the trouble with being a conspiracist is you get bugged by reality and you don't realize you've been bugged by reality. You think you've been bugged by, as you said, by the deep state or something, right? And that's just the conspiracists who are going to ruin the tariff, ruin the fact that the tariffs are good for the country.
That's one of the points that Renee DiResta makes in her book, is that it doesn't matter, like they just move on from, and I've noticed it myself in my research. It's one of the things, they just move on to the next conspiracy theory. I mean, QAnon has survived, what should have been, infinite number of fatal blows at this point in time to the conspiracy theory, and yet it hasn't. And we barely even touched on that, and that was a major force in the 2020 election, major force in January 6th, and it's still a force out there to this day. And Pizzagate, something Elon Musk has floated on X and endorsed. I mean, this is crazy stuff, but the point is, whether they believe it or not, it's politically strong enough now and vehement now, and has such a saliency to what they want to do, that they're endorsing it and are promulgating it, right? So it doesn't matter if they believe it or not, right? Yeah. It's politically powerful for them.
No, that's true, and it has its real world effects, obviously, in all kinds of policy areas. Yikes, as I said before. Tom Joscelyn, this has been really fascinating. We'll come back and continue this discussion in a while, and you'll be writing about it for the Bulwark, I trust. And thank you for taking the time on this Sunday to join me.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I tend to be a Debbie Downer, but we'll.
No, Debbie Downer. I don't know. I was looking back at the origin of Debbie Downer. It's not worth getting into, but yes, Debbie was correct. It's like Cassandra. People say, don't be a Cassandra. Cassandra was correct, if I'm not mistaken, in Greek mythology. Right. Debbie Downer was probably correct too. And said it out live or wherever she comes from. Yeah. Anyway, Tom, thanks for joining me, and thank you all for joining us on the Bulwark on Sunday.
Hey, YouTube fam, if you want to support the Bulwark, the best way to do it is by becoming a YouTube Bulwark Plus member. The Bulwark is truly independent. We have no corporate overlords. We're not settling any dumb lawsuits with Trump. By joining, you help support our work, and you can get a bunch of perks right here on this platform. Ad-free content, bonus videos, live streams, and some emojis of me, which I guess some people want. So come join, come hang out, become a Bulwark YouTube Plus member, and I'll be seeing you in the comments. So behave.